Every day, at 7 in the morning, a dirty, overweight man would sit on the sidewalk in front of the mirrored building of Almeida Corporation in downtown São Paulo. He smelled of old urine mixed with sour sweat. His ripped clothes looked like they hadn't seen water in months, and his swollen eyes barely opened when someone passed by. For 3 whole months, hundreds of company employees stepped past that body lying on the ground every day, averted their eyes with disgust, quickened their pace, clutching their bags in fear. And no one, absolutely no one, imagined that that homeless man was Marcos Almeida, the billionaire owner of the company they so admired in meetings and so feared in the hallways. The day he finally got up from that sidewalk, walked through the main gate, and revealed who he really was, 32 employees were fired on the spot. And what he discovered in those 3 months of invisibility forever changed the way that company operated. If you've ever felt like people only see you when you have money, power, or status, and that the second you lose all of it, you simply cease to exist in others' eyes, this story will make you question every judgment you've ever made about someone on the street, because what Marcos saw while pretending to be invisible was not just the cruelty of people, it was proof that most of us only see another human being when they're useful for something. Before continuing this story, I wanted to ask you for something simple. If you like hearing real stories that touch the heart and make us reflect on who we truly are when no one is looking, subscribe here to the channel. Every week we bring stories like this about people who went through extreme situations and discovered truths we'd rather not face. Your subscription helps me continue bringing these stories, and I promise that each one will be worth your time and will make you think differently about the world around you. Marcos Almeida was 53 years old when he decided he was going to become a homeless man. He wasn't crazy, he hadn't lost everything, he wasn't running from anything. In fact, he had just closed the most profitable quarter in the history of Almeida Corporation, a technology company that employed over 1,200 people and grossed billions a year. But Marcos was tired of meetings where everyone smiled at him but talked badly about him in the hallways, tired of employees who fawned in front of him but treated colleagues of lower hierarchy like trash, tired of feeling like the company he built with his own hands had become a den of fake, cruel, and selfish people. He lived alone in a 3,000-square-foot apartment in the southern zone of São Paulo, with a view of the reservoir and a wine cellar worth more than most people earned in 5 years. His grey hair was always neatly cut, his clothes always impeccable, and his Swiss watch gleamed on his left wrist like a symbol of all that he had achieved. But inside, Marcos felt empty. He had lost his wife 5 years earlier in a car accident that happened on a rainy Tuesday night, August 12th. Since then, he'd thrown himself into work as if drowning, trying not to think. And the more he dove in, the more he realized that the company he loved had become a place where people were judged by their position, their salary, the clothes they wore, and never, ever by the essence of who they were. It was on a Thursday, after a particularly tense meeting where he saw a manager humiliate an intern in front of everyone just because the girl had forgotten to print a report, that Marcos made the most insane decision of his life. He was going to disguise himself as a homeless man and spend 3 months in front of his own company, observing how his employees treated invisible people. He wanted to see with his own eyes who, among those 1,200 people who worked for him, still had humanity, who still saw their neighbor, who still had a heart. And he knew that for it to work, the disguise had to be perfect. Marcos spent weeks preparing. He bought old clothes at thrift stores in the outskirts, ripped the hems of his pants, stained his t-shirts with dirt and old coffee. He stopped cutting his hair and beard. He stopped showering. He bought a dirty blanket at a junkyard and filled an old plastic bag with crushed cans and cardboard. He rehearsed his posture, his gestures, the lost look of someone who had given up on life. And on March 1st, a grey and cold Monday, Marcos sat for the first time on that sidewalk in front of the building that bore his family's name and became a ghost. The first few hours were the hardest. Marcos had never felt so cold in his life. The concrete of the sidewalk burned with cold, and São Paulo's biting wind seeped through the gaps in his ripped clothes and bit his skin as if it had teeth. He huddled under the dirty blanket, pulled the old hood over his head, and pretended to sleep. And it was there, in that position, that he began to observe. At 7:15 a.m., the first wave of employees started to arrive. Marcos knew many of them by sight. He had signed contracts for some, participated in meetings with others, seen family photos on the internal bulletin boards. But, at that moment, huddled on the sidewalk like a pile of human rags, he was just another obstacle in their path. A woman in high heels sidestepped him with such an explicit look of disgust that Marcos's stomach churned. A man in a grey suit spat on the ground next to him and muttered something about these people who don't want to work. 3 interns walked by, laughing loudly. One of them pointed at him and made a comment that Marcos couldn't quite hear, but which ended with the 3 of them laughing even louder. In 2 hours, 147 people passed him. 147. And not one, absolutely not one, stopped to ask if he was okay. None offered him a coffee. None even looked him in the eye. The first person who spoke to him was a young woman named Beatrice. She was about 22, with curly hair pulled into a messy ponytail, and carried an old backpack on her shoulders. Marcos recognized her immediately. She was an administrative assistant in the IT department, earned a salary that barely covered rent and transportation, and he knew she was studying college at night because he had seen her name on a list of scholarships the company offered. Beatrice stopped in front of him, knelt down slowly and asked, "Are you all right, sir? Are you feeling anything?" Her voice came out soft, genuinely concerned. Marcos raised his swollen eyes and mumbled something incomprehensible. Beatrice opened her backpack, pulled out a still warm pound de queijo wrapped in a napkin, and placed it in his hand. "I bought 2 on the way, but I can only manage 1. "Eat it, it's still warm," she said. And before Marcos could reply, she had already stood up and entered the building, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Marcos held the pão de queijo in his trembling hands and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. Shame for doubting that good people still existed. And at the same time, a deep sadness because he knew Beatrice was the exception, not the rule. In the following days, Marcos established a routine. He would wake up at 5 in the morning in his apartment, deliberately get dirty, put on his filthy clothes, and head to the company's sidewalk. He stayed there from 7 in the morning until 7 at night, observing. He mentally noted the name of every person who passed, every gesture, every word, and at night he would return home, shower, and write everything down in a notebook. He created categories. The invisibles who passed by him as if he didn't exist. The hostiles who showed disgust, anger, or contempt. The fakes who tossed a coin without even looking at him, just to ease their own conscience. And the humans, those very rare ones who stopped, who asked, who looked him in the eye. In 3 months, Marcos counted exactly 11 people in the humans category. 11 out of more than 1,000 employees. Beatrice was one of them. There was also Mr. John, a 60-year-old man who worked in maintenance and every day shared his lunchbox with Marcos. There was Carla, a lawyer from the legal department who once sat on the ground next to him in her white suit and spent 15 minutes talking about life. And there were 8 others, each with their own story, each with their small yet giant gesture of humanity. But the vast majority, folks, the vast majority were heartbreakingly cruel. Marcos saw things he never imagined he would see. He saw a CFO, a man earning over $50,000 a month, deliberately kick the soda can Marcos had beside him just to watch it roll down the sidewalk. He saw an HR manager, the same one who talked about empathy and company culture in meetings, pass him by, gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white, as if Marcos were going to snatch everything from her at any second. He saw interns laughing, taking sneaky photos of him, posting them on their stories with captions like, "The glamour of working downtown." He saw security guards from the company itself try to get rid of him several times, until Marcos, maintaining his character, would beg with a choked voice to be allowed to stay just a little longer. And each day, each silent humiliation, each look of disgust, Marcos felt a mixture of rage and disappointment grow inside him that he had never felt before. Because these people, all of them, worked for a company that paid well, offered benefits, and preached values of respect and inclusion. But in practice, when no one from the top brass was watching, they showed who they really were. One of the most painful scenes happened on a rainy Wednesday in mid-April. Marcos was soaked, shivering from the cold under the blanket that no longer protected him from anything. The rain poured down, forming puddles around him, and the wind whipped the icy water directly into his face. He saw a woman getting out of a black car, holding an expensive umbrella. It was Patricia, the marketing director, one of the highest-paid executives in the company. She wore a beige wool coat that surely cost more than 2 minimum wages. As she passed Marcos, he raised a trembling hand and asked, with the weakest voice he could muster, "Please, Mum, do you have $1 for a cup of coffee?" Patricia stopped. For a second, Marcos thought she was going to help. But then she turned her face, looked him up and down with an expression of absolute revulsion, and said, "I don't give money to people who don't want to work. Go find a job instead of begging here." And she walked away, leaving Marcos alone in the rain, soaked, invisible. That night, when Marcos returned home and looked in the mirror, he saw a different man. He was no longer the billionaire business owner. He was someone who had been broken from the inside, someone who had seen the rottenest side of humanity and could no longer pretend he didn't know. But not everything was darkness. There were moments that restored Marcos's faith. Like the day Beatrice returned with a new, clean blanket, still with the tag on, and said, "I know you didn't ask, but I saw it was very cold, and I couldn't stop thinking about you out here all night." Marcos tried to refuse, but she insisted, and when she left, he cried under that new blanket like he hadn't cried since his wife's funeral. Or like the day Mr. John, the maintenance man, brought a pair of thick socks and said, "Son, take these. My feet are big, but socks stretch. Wear them. This cold is killer." Or like the day Carla, the lawyer, stopped in front of him and asked, "Do you have family? Does anyone know you're out here?" And when Marcos shook his head no, she said, "Then I'll be your family while you're here, okay? Every day I'll stop by, and every day I'll ask if you're okay." And she kept her word. For 2 full months, Carla stopped every single day, asked how he was, brought food, brought medicine when he pretended to be sick, and treated him like a human being. At the end of the 3rd month, Marcos had seen everything he needed to see. He had the complete list. He knew exactly who the 11 were who had hearts. And he knew exactly who the 32 were who had been so cruel, so inhuman, that they no longer deserved to work at his company, because Marcos had a simple rule. If you can't treat a homeless person on the street with basic dignity, you won't be able to treat your colleagues, your clients, or any human being with respect when you think no one is watching. On the morning of June the 2nd, a sunny and warm Monday, Marcos got up from the sidewalk for the last time. He folded the blanket Beatrice had given him, put it in his bag, and walked to the entrance of the building. The security guards tried to stop him, but Marcos pulled an ID card from his pocket that he had hidden for all those months. The guards turned pale. Within 10 minutes, the news had spread throughout the entire building. The owner of the company, Marcos Almeida, was here, alive, dressed as a beggar, and calling an emergency general meeting. At 10 in the morning, 1,200 people were gathered in the main auditorium. The silence was sepulchral. Marcos walked onto the stage, still dirty, still smelling, still dressed in those torn clothes. He looked out at the audience and saw pale faces, wide eyes, open mouths. He saw Patricia, the marketing director, her hand clamped over her mouth, looking like she was going to hurl. He saw the CFO who'd kicked his soda can, trying to shrink into his chair. He saw the interns who'd taken photos of him looking at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. And he also saw Beatrice, Mr. Johnson, Carla, and the other 8, confused but unafraid. Marcos picked up the microphone and said, "For the last 3 months, I've been on the sidewalk in front of this building every day from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. I saw every single one of you walk by me, some of you multiple times a day, and I took notes on everything." The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Marcos raised a hand, signaling for quiet. "I did this because I needed to know who you really are when you think no one is watching. I needed to know if the company I built still has real people in it, or if it's become just a bunch of robots in suits who only see status and money." He paused, and what I discovered disgusted me. Marcos pulled a list from his pocket. 32 people in this room treated a human being, a defenseless homeless man on the street, with cruelty, contempt, or violence. 32 people who walked past me like I was trash, who spat near me, who laughed at me, who insulted me, who kicked me, who took pictures to mock me with their friends. He began to read the names, one by one. Each name called was followed by a deathly silence and the sound of someone starting to cry. Patricia was among the names, the CFO too, managers, coordinators, analysts, interns. When he finished reading, Marcos said, "You are all fired, effective immediately. You can gather your things and go. I don't want heartless people working here." The auditorium exploded, people screaming, people crying, people begging for a second chance. But Marcos didn't falter. There are no second chances for those who choose to be cruel. You can leave. Security guards escorted the 32 out while the rest of the company watched in shock. When the commotion subsided, Marcos took a deep breath and said, "Now, I want to call 11 people to the front." He called the names: Beatrice, Mr. Johnson, Carla, and the other 8. They walked onto the stage, confused, startled. Marcos looked at each of them and said, "You were the only ones. Out of 1,200 people who treated me like a human being, you stopped, you asked, you gave food, a blanket, conversation, dignity. You saw me when I was invisible." He paused, his voice catching. "And because of that, each of you will receive an immediate promotion, a 50% raise, and a personal letter from me thanking you for proving to me that kindness still exists in this world." Beatrice began to cry. Mr. Johnson took off his old cap and clutched it to his chest. Carla covered her face with her hands. The auditorium erupted in applause. If this story is resonating with you, imagine what's next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. Here, we tell real stories of people who face the impossible, and I'm sure many of them will make you feel less alone on this journey. And tell me in the comments, Have you ever been in a situation where you realized people only treat you well when you have something to offer? Have you felt what it's like to be invisible to the eyes of those who should see you? Write, "I've been there" below if this story touched you in any way. Your comment might be exactly the message someone else needed to read today to know they're not alone. In the following months, Almeida Corporation changed completely. Marcos implemented a mandatory empathy program for all employees. Once a month, every executive, manager, and coordinator was required to spend a full day working in community services, at shelters, soup kitchens, in direct contact with people in vulnerable situations. Anyone who refused was fired on the spot. Marcos also created a permanent fund to help the homeless, funded by the company itself, and put Beatriz in charge of the project. She, who 3 months earlier was earning a minimum wage and a half, was now overseeing a budget of millions and changing lives every day. Mr. Johnson became facilities supervisor with a salary that finally allowed him to retire with dignity and still help his grandchildren with their studies. Carla was promoted to legal director and became the company's voice of conscience, always reminding everyone that profit without humanity is just greed disguised as success. Marcos's story leaked to the press, of course. It became national news. Some called him crazy. Others called him a genius. But what mattered to him was that for the first time in years, when he walked into that building, he saw real people. People who smiled not because he was the boss, but because they had learned to see the human being before the title. People who treated the janitor with the same respect they treated the director. People who stopped to help when they saw someone fallen on the street because they had learned in the worst possible way that any one of us could be that person one day. Marcos never sat on that sidewalk again, but every day when he arrived at work, he would pause for a few seconds in the exact spot where he had spent 3 months of his life. And he would give thanks. Thanks for having the courage to see the truth. Thanks for the 11 people who restored his faith in humanity. And thanks for learning that money, power, and status mean nothing if you lose the ability to look at another human being and see yourself. The lesson Marcos learned was simple but devastating. We live in a world where a person's worth is measured by what they have, not by who they are. Where we walk past beggars, past homeless people, past people asking for help, and we look away because it's easier to pretend they don't exist than to face the fact that they are exactly like us, just without luck. Marcos discovered that within each of us lies the choice to be Beatriz or to be Patricia, to be Mr. Johnson or the director who kicked the can, to be Carla or the interns who took photos to laugh. And that choice defines not who we appear to be, but who we really are when no one is judging us, when no one is watching us, when we think our actions will have no consequences. Beatrice, now 26, and in a position she never dreamed of holding, says that the cheese bread she gave Marcos was the best investment of her life. Not because it yielded a promotion or money, but because she discovered that doing good without expecting anything in return is the only thing that truly matters in the end. Mr. Henderson, retired now but still stopping by the company every week as a volunteer, says sharing his lunch with that disheveled man on the sidewalk was the most natural thing in the world, because his mother always taught him that food shared satisfies more hunger than food hoarded. Carla says sitting on the ground next to that homeless man was the most important decision of her career, because it was there she understood that empathy isn't just talk, it's action. And Mark, now 56, with completely white hair and eyes that carry the weight of everything he's seen, says those 3 months on the sidewalk were the 3 most important months of his life. Because he lost his innocence, he lost the illusion that financial success means human success, but he gained something far more valuable. He gained the certainty that there are still good people in the world, and he gained the responsibility to use his power to ensure these good people are valued, protected, and placed in positions where they can spread kindness instead of being crushed by cruel people. Today, Almeida Corporation is no longer just a billion-dollar tech company. It's proof that it's possible to profit without losing your soul, that it's possible to grow without stepping on anyone, that it's possible to lead by demanding not just competence, but humanity. And all because one man had the courage to disguise himself as a homeless person and face the raw, unvarnished truth about who works for him. The truth hurts, folks, but the truth also sets you free. And sometimes, for us to change the world, we first need the courage to see the world as it really is. No filters, no excuses, no lies. If this story touched your heart in any way, I implore you from the bottom of my heart, subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't just tell stories, we create a space where real people share real struggles and find comfort in knowing they're not alone. Every subscription helps me continue this work, and I promise that every week you'll find a story here that will make you reflect, cry, smile, and, above all, feel understood. And before you go, do me a favor, write in the comments one word, just one, that sums up what you felt listening to this story. It could be hope, it could be strength, it could be pain. It doesn't matter what it is, because every comment down here turns into a chain of support for someone who might be going through the worst time of their life and needs to know that people care. Write, "This story moved me," if you felt something. Thank you so much for sticking with me this far. It means more than you know. Give it a thumbs up if this story resonated with you, and I'll see you in the next story. I'll be waiting for you here.